Well, good morning and welcome to the Juniper Center Thrive Live, which features conversations with guests on mental health related topics. We're really trying to help clinicians and everyone else to be able to thrive in the face of adversity and challenges. And as we know, this has been a time that has been fraught with challenges. We have the Delta variant now on our heels. And so I think this is really timely today. So I'm Dr. Margot Jacot. I'm your host. I'm the Chief Care Officer and owner of the Juniper Center, and also the host of a podcast called Your Mental Health Business Mentor. So just so you know, this is your trigger warning. Before we start, I want you to know that we are going to be talking about suicide today. So if that's something that might be difficult for you, please do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, including maybe step out. But of course, we're so happy to have you here. So I hope you will stay with us if you can. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. Frank King, I'm so happy to have you here with us today. He's a comedian and public speaker. He regularly speaks about suicide prevention. And he said the one thing that stops him from his own suicide is the fact that he talks about suicide. And I'll tell you, as a therapist, it's like this foreboding topic. You don't talk about it. He talks about suicide. He says that's the secret to his success. It's honesty, transparency, and that's the way he helps others. Frank is a 5-time TEDx speaker and co-author of a book called Guts, Grit, and the Grind. It's a series of books with mental health advice geared toward men, which is fabulous. There's just not enough geared specifically toward men. And he is the most positive suicidal person you've ever met. Welcome, Frank, to the Juniper Center Thrive Live. There you are. Good morning, Frank.
One quick correction, 6 TEDx talks, thank you.
6, right? As of today, 6 TEDx talks. That's great. And I want everybody to hear about this current one because I think it's really important. And for those of you who are watching, please let us know you're here. If you have a question, a comment, you can say hi. You can ask a question in the comments section. So, well, Frank, good morning. Thanks for being here. You are in California, is that right?
No, phone number's California. I'm in Eugene, Oregon.
Oh, in Oregon. Okay, so you're still on that same time zone. So it is 7:30 there. You were kind enough to get up and do this with us.
Yes, I have comedian friends who don't realize there is a 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It actually does happen. That's right. So, Frank, you are so direct in talking about suicide, which you know probably better than I do how rare that is. I mean, that's not something that people do very often. It makes people uncomfortable typically. And I can tell you as a therapist, it makes people uncomfortable. So tell us about your superpower, as you call it.
Well, when I was ramping up or rolling up to my first TEDx talk, then the reason I did the first one was I've been a comedian for decades. And I had to rebrand, as my friend Judy Carter says, from a funny speaker to a speaker who was funny. My lovely wife suggested do a TED Talk. I said, what's a TED Talk? Famously. And I got an email that week in the mail said, please apply. So I applied. I got my first one. And that's where at age 52, I came out as depressed and suicidal. No one knew. My family, my friends, my wife, like a lot of people with mental illness, I covered it up. And I did it well. There's a reason I have a Screen Actors Guild card, SAG card. So and it allowed me to do something very serious on camera. So the meeting planners realized, hey, now in the ramp up to that, I discovered that even though one person dies by suicide every 9 minutes in the US, hardly anybody talks about it unless you bring it up. Mm-hmm. And almost everybody has a story. I was working a cruise ship in the Lido buffet at breakfast, couldn't find a seat. There's a woman, table for 2, empty chair. I point, she nods, I sit. She looks up, she goes, hey, are you the comedian? I go, hey, did you enjoy the show? She goes, I enjoyed the show very much. Then I'm the comedian. She said, what would you have said if I told you I wasn't?
It was me.
Yeah. What would you have said if I told you I wasn't? I was not the comedian. I would say, I look a lot like him.
Yeah, right.
She asked me if comedy was all I did. And I said, no, I'm a speaker. And if you don't mind me bragging, I just nailed down my first TED Talk. And she goes, I love the TED Talk. what's the topic? And I had this conversation so many times I thought I knew what was coming. So I said, depression and suicide, and started counting down in my head. 3, 2, 1. She says, Frank, I tried to kill myself twice. We have just met. And it's his first time in college, kind of half-hearted. Second time, much more serious. I'd graduated college, graduated medical school, had the knowledge, had the equipment, had the IV started in my ankle. Cocktail in one hand, syringe in the other, getting ready to load it up, and the phone rings. Do I answer it? Well, better. Might be somebody who would get worried, come over, interrupt. Picks it up, her 13-year-old son. She goes, I don't know if you heard something in my voice, had a premonition, but he said, Mom, don't do anything. So I didn't. I did not give up on the idea of suicide, but I was not going to do it that day because I knew he'd always feel guilty. Wasn't there something he could do or say to stop my suicide? And the good news is there are things you can do. There are things you can say. And that's what I keynote on. So I said to her, how old is he now? She goes, he's 21. I said, does he know his phone call saved your life? She goes, no. Famously, she said, how do you start that conversation? I thought, that's my job. That's going to be my tagline, starting the conversation on suicide.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for doing that. And Elizabeth Berland is here today and says, thank you for bringing up this topic, bringing it to the forefront. It's so true. I mean, sadly, we just had someone who was in our care, in our practice. This is the first time really I can think of in ever that somebody has succeeded with a suicide. And it's so devastating, obviously. So it's so important that we're talking about it. It has to be talked about. So Frank, you sit down at this table, you're on a cruise ship, you've just done a comedy sketch. I mean, so a comedian talking about suicide, it's like, but so how that makes you so much more accessible. You're not a therapist. You're not a coach. You're somebody who is living this. So as you're talking about it, people have said to you, well, why haven't you killed yourself? Which is kind of a rude question, I guess. But how do you end up talking about that? Because you've talked about having, and this is a term that I think perhaps you coined, which is chronic suicidal ideation. Like that's what it is. So when people say to you, well, why didn't you kill yourself? How do you respond to that?
Well, and by the way, chronic suicidal ideation is not in the DSM yet, but it is a thing. And I've had clinicians stare at me when I said that. Chronic suicidal, they look at me like George Bush of the New York Times crossword puzzle. And it is a thing. And here's the upside of that thing, by the way. Every time I've spoken, except once since 2014, there's been at least one person in the audience who has chronic suicidal ideation. They don't know it has a name. They think they're just some kind of freak by the way they think, and all alone. Young woman came up after a college presentation. She goes, thanks for your keynote. I said, you're welcome. She said, but I got to tell you, it made me weep. How did it make you weep? She said, well, I tell a story about chronic suicidal ideation means that suicide is always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And I tell the audience, when I say small, my car broke down a couple of years ago. Had 3 thoughts unbidden: get it fixed, buy a new one, or I could just kill myself. That's chronic suicidal ideation. So she said, when you told the story about your car, get it fixed, buy a new one, you could just kill yourself. She goes, I've been having those thoughts my entire life. I had no idea that had a name. I just thought I was some kind of freak. And when I heard you say that out loud, I realized for the first time in my life that I am not alone, and I wept. Yeah. It happens over and over and over again. And very therapeutic for me, obviously.
Sure.
People have said to me, does it trigger you to tell your story? No, it's just the reverse. When somebody comes up like that afterwards, sometimes more than somebody. A couple of reasons here's the number one reason. I have 2 reasons that I can think of right this minute why I don't kill myself. One is that, that telling that story, because I feel sort of like George Bailey in the movie It's a Wonderful Life. Having talked to all these people and let them know they weren't alone, that, that if I wasn't there, if I died by suicide and I wasn't there to let them know simply they're not alone, then it's possible I would take all those people with me because they never had a chance. The second thing is my mother and my father desperately wanted children. And my mother got pregnant, carried to term, and it didn't make it. Got pregnant again, carried to term, did not make it. Where she found the courage to try a 3rd time, I have no idea, but she did. And I was born. And then fourth time, my sister was born. So my feeling is that she was so brave and worked so hard to bring me here that I have to be as brave and work as hard to stick around till my appointed time.
So you have found ways to feel like it's important for you to be here.
Yes, and you know the protocol when somebody is depressed and suicidal. Are you depressed? Yes. Thoughts of suicide? Yes. Do you have a plan? Yes. What is your plan? Well, there are no more questions. So a psychiatrist and I, who also has chronic suicidal ideation, because we have these thoughts all the time, we came up with the next question we think should be asked. If their plan is not particularly specific to time, place, method, then I would say to them, and I have said to them, oh, well, tell me, are you going to kill yourself? And if they say no, I say, okay, tell me why not. Make them give voice to whatever it is that's keeping them here.
Oh, wow. Frank, exactly. Right. Because it is kind of a, oh, have you thought about killing yourself? How are you going to do it? Do you have the means to do it? And then it's usually, well, can you keep yourself safe? That's not the right question.
No, I don't think so.
It's really not the right question. And it's the one that we're taught to ask people. Can you keep yourself safe? Well, what kind of, when I used to teach graduate school, I would tell students all the time, don't ask stupid questions. Like some questions, it sounds terrible, especially as a therapist. There are such things as stupid questions, but that's not a helpful question, right? A much more helpful question is, are you going to do it? And if not, why not?
Yeah, right? Because if they're on that track the way they're going to do it, then you ask that question, they have to jump off that track to figure out and ask themselves, well, why not?
Why not? Yeah, right. And for them to give voice to that, I love that phrase that it's all about giving voice, because this is something that lives in the shadows, right? People, better than I do. People don't talk about this.
No.
Right? So being able to talk about it with you or with their therapist, and quite frankly, therapists, we have to get better. Those of you who are therapists out there watching this, we have to get more okay with having these conversations and not getting freaked out by it. We're afraid that we're going to lose someone. We're afraid we're going to get sued because someone has killed themselves. So we have all of this internal stuff that isn't helpful in the moment. So help people give voice. And I'm so glad that you're able to do that. You said in your keynote, Frank, that you also talk about there are things that you can say. There are things that you can do. What are those?
Well, 8 out of 10 people roughly who are suicidal are ambivalent. So they're not quite sure. And 9 out of 10 give hints in the last week leading up to the attempt. So that tells me that the vast majority of people, they're not committed to it. And the trick is how to spot those hints. So I teach signs and symptoms of depression and thoughts of suicide, what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do. If they're depressed, if they admit they're depressed, don't say pull yourself up by your bootstraps, turn that frown upside down. Have you tried fish oil?
Right. Have you tried fish oil? Right. Vitamin D.
How many times?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I tell them what you should say. I'm here for you and I mean it. I know you're not lazy, crazy, or self-absorbed. I know that depression is a mental illness. Here's the good news. With time and treatment, things will get better. I'll take the time. I'll help you get the treatment. And at that point, you have to ask, are you having thoughts of suicide? Which is, and when I keynote, I go, look, if you can't ask that question, you find somebody who can. And that, by the way, is something from Paul Gwinnett, Dr. Paul Gwinnett, who created QPR, question, persuade, refer. That's his line. If you can't ask that question, you find somebody who can.
I love that. That's really great. Kate is here and is asking, hello, Kate, by the way. And yes, if you're out there and would like to let us know you're here, we'd love to know you're here. Kate is asking, who would find you after the suicide is another one that could lead to uncovering the dynamics of their mind.
Yes and no. People think that suicide is a selfish act. And from the outside looking in, it is. Aren't they concerned about the people they're going to leave behind? But you probably are aware that one of the 3 legs of the 3-legged stool of suicidality is burdensomeness. Oh, yes, they have considered the people they're going to leave behind. And I felt that the world would be better off without me. So it's almost a selfless act, irrational, but selfless from the perspective of the person who is suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
So finding me is, I had $1 million life insurance policy. And if I ended my life, my wife would have gotten $1 million. And so, I wasn't concerned. I did decide to go to the barn where, I would leave, I didn't know what to do in the house and, and make a mess, I guess. Strange thought to have, but yeah.
Yeah. So, not everyone, first of all, I think for folks who are watching this, not everyone can either pick up on those hints, or as you said, people are really good at it. Your wife didn't even know that this was happening, right? So things could have this could have happened and nobody really would have known that. They would have known after the fact, but they wouldn't have known how much you've been struggling. So, it's a tricky one because we can't always know that it's coming, but the more we can talk about it, I don't want everybody to think they can, prevent it necessarily, right? Because there's that guilt of I should have known, I could have known, and but having the conversation and getting educated about what kinds of things should we be looking for. And I'll tell you, I have 2 teenage boys, and even though neither of them, thank goodness, has talked about that or gone down that route, I am really alert because I might not know. I just might not know. So I appreciate the idea of let's make sure we have these conversations. So I talk to my kids about it and they hate it. They hate it, but I think it's important. So I'm glad that you're inviting people to do so and that you talk about that in your TEDx talk. So, one of the missions that I feel like I'm on, and a lot of us are these days, is about demolishing the stigma around mental health and getting mental health treatment. And you'd like people to be able to talk about suicide just like they talk about sports or music or, movies or anything else. And that you've done these 6 TEDx talks. How has that platform helped your message get out? How do we help people begin to say, yes, we can talk about mental health. We can even talk about the big S, like we talk about movies and sports and everything else.
I've got a friend in the Chamber of Commerce here, and I was doing a speech on networking, a 15-minute networking speech, and they introduced me as the mental health comedian. And so he came up afterwards, he goes, I enjoyed your speech, but I want to know, what's the mental health comedian? So I said, I speak on suicide prevention as a workplace health or college safety issue. And he said, well, honestly, my wife has lived with depression for quite some time, some medication, but it's working okay. And I said, well, I'd recommend you 2 sit down and watch my first TEDx talk, because it's where I came out. Because his wife had a very small world, raising 2 kids, didn't have a lot of friends. Not because she was depressed, but it wasn't the kind of thing she would share with a friend. So he said, Frank, I'm watching her watching you on the screen. And when it got done, she goes, oh, dear Lord. I didn't think anybody ever talked about that, much less talked about it on YouTube around the world. So it changed. And then I invited her. We have what I call a crazy coffee clutch. It's a half dozen friends all in town who have one mental illness or another. We get together for a cup of coffee. We take our game faces off, the one we show the world, and we just are ourselves for an hour and talk about things oftentimes very dark, because that's the way we relate to one another. And she joined the coffee club. She came in. Now she's got a circle of friends who have similar issues. It's like peer counseling, almost coffee and counseling almost. She knows she's not alone. She knows there are other people. And the stigma, what I try to do is, if everybody kind of has in their mind what mental illness looks and sounds like, then they come see me, and I'm a comedian, wrote jokes for Lynn over 20 years, obviously high functioning. And it's just not how they perceived or what they thought mentally ill people look like. So it's sort of a cognitive dissonance. They have this image, and then they have me on stage, and you can't hold those 2 thoughts simultaneously. So if you change perceptions, you can change prejudices. If you can change prejudices, you can change behavior.
Exactly. So the more people who can come out and say, I struggle with anxiety, I struggle with depression, I struggle with an eating disorder, any of these things, the more we can be talking about them, the more people feel like it's okay to talk about it. And if people are talking about it, to your point with this coffee clutch, how great is that for people to feel like I've got a safe place to go?
Yes, where there's no judgment. As we say in the mental health business, no, I don't should all over them. You should do this and you should do that.
Exactly. Yeah,
Well, go ahead.
we have Ivan Sanchez who said there is no shame on you, Healthy Hood Chicago coffee. How great is that? Hip hop and mental health with NAMI, which is the National Association of Mental Illness in Chicago. And he thought this would interest the network. Absolutely. Thank you, Ivan. That's great. No shame on you, Healthy Hood coffee, Chicago coffee, hip hop and mental health. Well, that's fabulous, right? I mean, sitting down, having coffee. Ivan, I'd be very curious how you get the hip hop part into that. Maybe there's music. I don't know if you're dancing too. I think that's fabulous. So, again, it's not to make light of this, right? That's really not the point. The point is to bring it out into the sun. And we have to find ways to be able to do that. So I love that. Hip hop and no shame. That's perfect. So do you find, Frank, when you're talking to people, I mean, when you and I were talking about this in advance, that situation you had with that woman on the cruise ship, that's not at all unusual for you.
No.
I mean, people really respond to this.
Yeah, and that's my job. And I've been told this by the people who hire me to keynote. They often say when I get there, we just brought you in here to start the conversation on suicide. And when I'm training speakers, speaker marketing coaching, I said, look, if you're talking on a mental health issue or a very personal issue like that, you need to do 45 minutes of a keynote, 15 Q&A in general, and then you need to set aside another half an hour because you've just given these people permission to give voice to these feelings and experiences without recrimination. And sometimes there's 2 people waiting to talk to me afterwards. Sometimes there's 8. And I set it up. I go, look, we're going to have general Q&A. But if there's a question you want to ask, you don't want to ask in front of everybody. You're like, I'm crazy. Can you help me?
Yeah, right.
I'll hang out until everybody gets their questions answered. And sometimes it's about themselves, a loved one, looking for resources, whatever. But it gives them, and sometimes they tell me things they've never told anybody, ever, even their therapist. I had a 69-year-old guy tell me he has chronic suicidality after I described it. And he goes, Frank, I've never said that out loud to anybody, not even my therapist. He's 69. Well, in California, if he told his therapist what he told me, it's called a 5150. That's the number of the law. They take him in front of a judge to get a 3-day involuntary detention order. So see if we allow people to talk about it openly without worrying about being locked down for 72 hours, then I think we could prevent suicide.
Right. So I'm sitting in that chair as the therapist who has a mandate. If somebody is talking about, intent, and there's something called terrorism. It looks like you have a friend there with you. That's cute. Sometimes up here. Yeah, it's great. I've got my fish behind me if the cat's interested. But so I'm sometimes that therapist sitting in that chair and talking to somebody. And I've had people say, I'm not going to tell you because I know what you have to do. And then I have to try to work our way out of that. And I can't legally say, right. No, absolutely, I won't. Like, shoot. So do you have advice? I mean, I think there's really something to be said. So how would you advise a therapist as someone who is really trying to get this word out? How would you advise a therapist? And of course, we have to follow the law. I mean, that's just what it is. But how would you advise a therapist to adjust how we're having these conversations? Because I think you're probably way better at it than most of us are, quite frankly.
Well, fortunately, I don't have a mandate. People can tell me all kinds of stuff, and I don't have to turn them in.
So for us who do have the mandate.
Yeah, I wish you could just go with your intuition in a situation like that. No, go ahead and tell me, and I'll listen. And if I think it's dangerous, I'm mandated by law. I face a great deal of liability if I'm worried and don't say something and you end your life. So I don't know that there's a simple answer. Yeah. Oh, you know what? Here's a simple answer. When I keynote, I put my cell phone number up on the screen. And I say, look, if you're suicidal, call the Lifeline. If you're just having a really bad day, call a crazy person. Here's my phone number. Because we hear the same music. They don't have to explain anything to me. And I'm not going to turn them in. I mean, if I thought they were actively suicidal and I knew their physical address, I would send the police over for a welfare check. That if they find them actively suicidal, then they will take them before a judge.
They will take them before a judge.
Yeah. So being a non-clinician actually has its advantages in that, I had a guy call one day. He heard me on a podcast And he said, I'm depressed and I'm suicidal. And then somewhere in the next couple of sentences, he said, I picked up an Amtrak schedule. So I said, look, I'm not going to ask you not to kill yourself. That's not my style. What I am going to ask you to do is not do it that way. Because when you step up on the tracks, you and the engineer are undoubtedly going to lock eyes, and your life will end, but probably so will the engineer. They'll never get over that. So please don't take anybody with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure a clinician could.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I tend to be kind of a not so therapist, I guess, but I've had these conversations with people where I've said, look, it's not my intention to lock you up. I want you to be okay. I want you to be able to talk about it, because same thing, if you can tell me about it, let's see what happens. Mm-hmm. And fortunately over the years that has frequently worked just fine. But again, we do have these mandates. So where are other places that people can go, right? They can call a suicide hotline. Mm-hmm. They can contact you, but, we don't want hundreds of people. So Frank, we want to be, not inundating you, but do you know of other resources where people can have these conversations?
Yes, and you mentioned it, or the gentleman from Chicago mentioned it, I think, NAMI, National Mental Illness. Mm-hmm. They have peer-to-peer counseling, family-to-family counseling, and everything they do is free. Everything
they do is free. Did I say association? Alliance. Yes.
Yes, and I volunteer at the state and local level here.
Yeah.
And I've keynoted for a couple of the state chapters. But that's the beauty of peer counseling. Mm-hmm. There's a story about a guy who falls down a well, and the well is so deep and there's no handholds, he can't get out. So a friend comes walking by, hears him down the well, and says, "Oh man, I wish I could help you in some way," and walks on. Then a family member comes by, same story. "Oh, well, I just have no way. I'm sorry, I can't help you." A stranger comes along, looks down the well, crawls over the lip of the well, drops to the bottom of the well. And the guy in the well says, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm here to help you." "How can you help me? You're now stuck in the well with me." "Yes, but I've been here before. I can help you get out."
Wow, Frank, I love that.
That's the power of peer counseling. And you can say those things in a peer counseling setting, generally, without being, subject to a lockdown.
Right. Oh my gosh. So for the therapists who are watching this, and really anybody, have those resources available. Yes, we are hopefully a resource, but the law has sort of, tied our hands, and people are smart. They know it. They know that if they tell us, it's not going to go the way that they want. So having those peer resources available sounds critical. So NAMI.org, lots of free resources. Please, please, please keep that by. If you're in Chicago, the No Shame on You Healthy Hood Chicago Coffee. If people are in your neck of the woods, they can potentially connect with you, Frank King, the mental health comedian. Frank, you also have written a book or a series of books. So tell us a little bit about that, because I want people to go away today with some good resources. So the NAMI is good, the No Shame on You is good, your website is good. Tell us about your book.
Well, and at my website, The Mental Health Comedian, if you put in an email address, I'm not only co-writer of the series of 4 books, I'm narrator. And so I had my audio editor, we put it up on Audible, but also I have an MP3 that you can download for free and hear the unabridged first book in the series on men's mental health. It's what happened is a woman named Sarah Gare, and she teaches QPR, question, persuade, refer, to first responders. And she had a particular gentleman, mostly men. There are women, but it's majority men. Matter of fact, her tagline is, "Hi, I'm Sarah. I specialize in men." And she wanted to buy a book on men's mental health, and went to Barnes and Noble, brick and mortar, couldn't find anything. So goes on Amazon, nothing. And she called a publisher friend. He said, "Well, there's no money in men's mental health books." So Sarah, being Sarah, thought, well, the money is not the issue. So she called Sally Spencer Thomas, Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas, who's way up the food chain in the world of suicide prevention. Her brother died by suicide. And Sally knows me. So Sarah and Sally called me and said, "Look, we're putting this thing together. We want to make it look like an automobile owner's manual. And we want to make it, humorous in spots." Would you put in the car metaphors and the humor? And I said, wait a minute, you two ladies are writing a book on men's mental health? Don't you think you might need, I don't know, a man?
I happen to have one right here.
A man. So, yeah. Now, because men make up 7 or 8 of the 10 out of 10 suicides in the U.S. right now, there's a desperate need. But you know, men aren't always forthcoming, especially about things emotional.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that would have been my first thought.
When it's officially, I think it's masculine toxicity or male toxicity. Where I grew up in the South, it was big boys don't cry.
Yep.
So the three of us thought we could probably find 12 guys who are willing to tell their stories and how they're coping to help other guys. Well, we found 64 guys. So what was one book became 4 books, 12 stories in each book. Each man has a different issue. Most divorce, alcoholism, drug addiction, gambling addiction, a horrible accident that left them incapacitated. And 3 books are up on Amazon, Guts, Grit, and the Grind. And the 4th one goes up this fall. And you know what we found is the analytics show that more women are buying it than men.
To help out their men. Yep.
I had a podcast turn me down. It was a podcast for women. She goes, but you wrote a book on men's mental health. And I said, okay.
This is great. Yeah.
Only the women listening to your show have a man they care about who's struggling, father, brother, son, cousin, friend. She wouldn't have me on the show. I thought, what a shame.
That is a huge shame. Well, her loss, because Frank, this is imperative that people are talking about this. So I plan to get your book, and we're going to keep several around the office. I think this is super, super important. I hope we can have another conversation because half an hour flies right by. And there's lots more I think that we could talk about. So I think Deanna, our producer, was trying to get your book cover up there. I don't think it looked like it wasn't working. It was just you and I kind of over to the side. So some technical glitch, which happens, but they can find it at thementalhealthcomedian.com. Any final words, Frank, before we go for today?
Yes, they can also go to gutsgritgrind.com and all the books. That's our website, gutsgritgrind.com. Yes, I think the silence kills. So what we need to do is, as uncomfortable as it may be, start the conversation.
Frank, you couldn't have said it. I couldn't have said it better. You said it perfectly. Start the conversation. So that's the big takeaway today, folks. Thank you so much for joining us on the Juniper Center Thrive Live. We will see you the first Friday of every month. And Frank, again, thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody have a wonderful weekend. Start the conversation.